Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange. Today I'm excited to bring you my last best of the year video. I have already talked about my favorite new release horror that came out this year, as well as my favorite science fiction fantasy. I will have those videos linked down below in case you missed them. Now this is my favorite backlist horror, which if you're not familiar with the term means horror that came out before 2019, so 2018 or in some cases much earlier. I have a really good variety here. I think it's really representative of the 5 directions that my horror reading kind of went, and I just can't wait to share them with you, so let's get started. First, at number 5, we have Cry Your Way Home by Damien and Angelica Walters. This is a short story collection that is a blend of horror, fantasy, and even science fiction that falls into the realm of speculative fiction, but there was enough horror in this collection that I feel comfortable to include it in this list here. And these are basically dark fairy tales that, again, kind of get into the realm of the creepy. And I just love this collection. I think this is the first time I've included a horror short story collection in one of my best of the year videos, because you've heard me say over and over again that while I like short story collections, some of the stories I like and some of them I don't. But in this case, I really did like them all, and in a lot of cases love the stories. There were so many favorites, so many standouts, stories that were retelling of Beauty and the Beast, stories about toxic, sickly sweet relationships, stories about girls that just float into the sky, and I really adored this collection. I did a separate review for this one and gushed about it more there, so if you want to hear more of my thoughts, more of my opinions on the individual stories, I will link to that, but I highly recommend it. If you are a fan of creepy fairy tales or just want to try something different, this is a great one to check out. It definitely reminded me how much I like when horror crosses over with other genres, which is something that I just fell in love with again this year. Next, at number 4, we have The Forgotten Island by David Sodergren, which is about a group of young people that decide to go on vacation in the Thailand area, and terrible things ensue, as you would expect from a horror novel. This book was just so much fun, so engaging. I loved every minute of it. It's definitely very summery, which is kind of weird to be thinking about this time of year, but I cannot recommend it enough. I found the characters to be so likable and in some cases so unlikable, but in a really good way, especially in a horror book where you know some people are possibly gonna die. And this book had some of the best kill scenes I've ever read. I'm not usually someone that's really drawn into the kill scenes. A lot of people always say, oh, what's your favorite kill scene in a book? And I didn't have an answer until I read this one, but it was just fun. I've got to stop using that word, but it's such a good way to describe it. And this book does incorporate several different subgenres of horror. I'm hesitant to say what they are because I don't want to spoil the reading experience for yourself, but I will say that there is pretty much something for every kind of horror reader in here. So I would pretty much use this as a stand-in for anyone asking me what book they should pick up in the horror genre, and if I don't know their reading taste, I would pretty much be safe to blanketly recommend this one. I think that it's just a good blend of creepy, fun, engaging story, and at the same time it's fairly safe in terms of subject matter, so it doesn't have some of the offensive things that will turn off other people from picking up a book. Now at number 3, we have Rosemary's Baby by Levin, which of course is a story of a young couple that move into a fancy apartment and they want to get pregnant. They become friends with a lot of the neighbors who seem very nice and helpful. However, things are not as perfect as they seem. This is a book that I have not shown a video review yet, but it is coming. And of course, you know that it's a favorite if it's on this list, and I just really enjoyed it. I don't always get along very well with classic books, but this one was just so easy to read, so gripping. I was immediately pulled into the narrative, and I just found the reading experience to be incredibly fun. I went in quite blind. I've never seen the movie, and I think that helped because I just didn't know where the story was going, and I loved where it went. For being a classic, I was surprised how dark and twisted the story is. I often come into classics with this preconceived idea that they're not really that scary, they can't be that weird because they were written a long time ago. Well, not the case here. This one is pretty bizarre, and yeah, I loved every minute of it. I do think that I got a lot more out of the reading experience because of the fact that I read this one after I have gone through a pregnancy, and this book definitely dives into the anxiety that revolves around a pregnancy, especially an uncertain one like I had, and my goodness, it just played on my nerves. I kind of want to read it if I'm ever pregnant again, but at the same time, I kind of don't want to read it if I get pregnant again. But I cannot recommend this one enough to anyone who hasn't gone and checked out the classic. Whether or not you've watched the movie, I think it's still well worth going back to the original source material. And my goodness, was it fun. And I love the ending. The ending was bananas, and it was definitely up my alley. It was so crazy. Now, for those of you that have been following my channel quite closely this year, you're probably not surprised that at number 2, we have Stirring the Sheets by Chad Lutzke. This is a novella about a man who works as a mortician. His wife has died years ago, and one day he works at the shop and finds a dead woman that looks a lot like his dead wife, and so he decides to take her home and take care of her. This book is all kinds of weird, but it's actually not as weird as it sounds. There is no necrophilia in this book, which I always like to mention. Instead, this is a really beautiful story about grief and love and just a man mourning his wife and coming to terms with it. So you've heard me say before, Chad Lutzke has well earned a place among my favorite authors. I've now read more of his books, and while I loved all of those, this one still comes up on top. I've done a separate review for this one where I basically gushed about it. But even if you're not someone who reads a lot of horror, I do know I have subscribers that enjoy watching my horror content, but they don't necessarily pick up those books. This is one you might want to consider because a lot of people don't consider Chad Lutzke's work technically to be horror. In some ways, you could call it like a dark contemporary. But if you like good characters, if you like good writing, if you like emotional stories that will pull at your heartstrings, and quite frankly, who doesn't like those things, then you should definitely check out this book. I think it's just gripping, and I loved every minute of it. Even though it's only novella length, it left such an impact on me using just a few pages, and I just cannot recommend this one enough. I'm always gushing about Chad Lutzke, and there's a reason for that, so if you're going to check him out, I personally recommend starting here, and I love this one. What else can I say about it? Finally, at number 1, we have Pet Sematary by Stephen King, which of course is a story of a family that moved to a new town where there is a graveyard that people go and bury their pets. I'm gonna leave the synopsis there just in case you don't know where the story goes. I want you to experience it for yourself like I did. But if you had told me at the beginning of this year that I would have a favorite Stephen King book on my list, let alone at number 1, I probably wouldn't have believed you. I've always had a very hit or miss relationship with this author, and that is still the case, but in this case, I loved it. I thought the story had so much emotional depth, which is something I appreciate. It's very family-centered, and at the same time, it's quite creepy, especially the ending. I thought it was one of the best endings I've read in a horror book, especially for Stephen King, and I just cannot recommend this one enough. I do think that if you want to start Stephen King or are looking for your own favorite by him, this is my personal recommendation. And I read this one earlier in the year. I actually read it as an audiobook. It's narrated by the guy who plays Dexter on TV, and that definitely added to the reading experience. But this one just stuck with me all year, and when I went to put together these rankings, I couldn't help but put this one on top. It's definitely an all-time favorite for me, my favorite Stephen King book, and just a really, really good story. So if you haven't read it yet, go ahead, pick up this book, and let me know what you think of it. So that is it for this video. Let me know if any of the books on this list surprised you. If you've read them, were they favorites for you as well? And if you haven't read them, let me know if I've convinced you to pick them up. I would also love to hear your favorite Backlist horror books that you read this year, so anything published before 2019. That way I can add them to my own TBR and hopefully pick them up soon. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you haven't yet subscribed, please do so. I read horror, science fiction, and fantasy. Otherwise, I will talk to you again soon in another video. Okay, bye-bye.